Hello, viewers. Welcome back to Offbeat Gyan. This video summarizes Act 3 of the long play The Way of the World. The Way of the World, as you know, was written by William Congreve. It is a Restoration era comedy, and there are a number of intrigues and plots and conspiracies in the play which make it quite confusing and complex. So, Act 3 of the play, the summary is actually quite long because a number of plans, conspiracies are afoot, and in order to keep track of all this, the presentation has become quite detailed. Anyway, let's jump into the summary of Act 3 of the play. So, Act 3 of the play is set in a room in Lady Wishfort's house. Lady Wishfort, as you know, is the aunt of the heroine of the play, Millamant. She is the mother of Mrs. Fainall, or Arabella Wishfort, who is married to the villain of the play, Mr. Fainall. And Millamant, the heroine of the play, is in love with Mirabell. Mirabell is the arch enemy of Lady Wishfort. So, coming back to Act 3. We find Lady Wishfort in an extremely irritated and agitated manner. She is extremely impatient with the poor maid Peg, and she keeps on berating Peg for behaving like a fool. But Peg doesn't know how to handle her. She asks Peg to get her some wine, and Peg tells her that the wine cupboard is locked and the key is with Lady Wishfort's maid Foible. So Foible has locked the wine cupboard and taken the key with her. And Lady Wishfort now waits for her trusted assistant Foible to return. But the person who comes at that moment of time is her dear friend Mrs. Marwood. Mrs. Marwood and Lady Wishfort are good friends. Lady Wishfort is sincere towards her, but Mrs. Marwood is insincere and she is extremely villainous. So, as soon as Mrs. Marwood sees Lady Wishfort's agitated condition, she remarks on her shabby appearance and her negligent attitude. And Lady Wishfort says that all this can be attributed to the continued absence of her devoted maid Foible. Then Mrs. Marwood tells her that she had seen Foible in the park talking to Mirabell. On hearing this, Lady Wishfort becomes angry and she begins to doubt the loyalty of Foible. She tells Mrs. Marwood that she had sent Foible on a secret mission and she hopes that Foible has not revealed the details of that mission to Mirabell. At that moment, Foible comes back and Lady Wishfort quickly asks Mrs. Marwood to hide in the closet and read the books kept there. She says that books by Quarles, Prynne, Bunyan and Reverend Jeremy Collier's short view of the stage are there to entertain her. Here, Congreve talks about this book. He mentions this book, Jeremy Collier's Short View of the Stage, because this was an important essay which was written by Collier to criticize the fallen standards in Restoration era plays. The plays were becoming very vulgar and disgusting, and there was a fallen standards, and Jeremy Collier had written an essay criticizing all this. So probably because of this, Congreve makes a mention of this essay, and he says that through Lady Wishfort, he tells the audience that this particular book is available in the closet and Mrs. Marwood can sit there, read this book along with the others and entertain herself. Moving on. Foible comes there and Lady Wishfort begins berating Foible for meeting and speaking to her hated enemy Mirabell. Foible cleverly manages the situation. She says that Mirabell had teased and ridiculed Lady Wishfort, but Foible had responded equally strongly. And Foible then advises Lady Wishfort that to counter the plans of Mirabell, Lady Wishfort must get married to Sir Rowland. Sir Rowland is Mirabell's purported uncle. And if Lady Wishfort marries Sir Rowland, then Mirabell stands to be disinherited. That is, he will lose his inheritance which he gets from Sir Rowland. But if Sir Rowland marries, then Mirabell will lose the inheritance. So Lady Wishfort, she says that she will quickly marry Sir Rowland and she will make sure that Mirabell loses his inheritance. Then she asks Foible when Sir Rowland will come. Because she is very impatient to meet Sir Rowland. She is a vain woman, but at the same time, she is very desperate to get companionship in her old age, and we tend to empathize with her. We sympathize with her because she is someone who is spending a lot of time alone, and she is looking to ward off her loneliness. So she is desperately waiting for someone to propose to her and get married. And Foible tells her that Sir Rowland is also equally desperate to meet her as early as possible. And then Lady Wishfort hopes that Mirabell will be in great debt and that he will never be able to marry her niece Millamant and get his hands on her fortune. Foible adds fuel to the fire. She says that she wants to see Mirabell in the debtor's prison, Ludgate prison in Blackfriars. And then Lady Wishfort suddenly gets worried about her badly made up face. She says that cracks have developed in her heavily powdered face, and she is worried that she may not be able to repair her looks before Sir Rowland comes to meet her. So Lady Wishfort asks Foible to help her with her makeup. And she is very curious about Sir Rowland's appearance because earlier Foible had gone to meet Sir Rowland and she had taken a miniature painting of the bust of Lady Wishfort, and she had informed Lady Wishfort that Sir Rowland had taken the picture and he had kissed it repeatedly. So now she wants to know, Lady Wishfort, she wants to know if Sir Rowland is handsome, and she is very tense, she is very nervous about meeting Sir Rowland. She says to her maid that she hopes that when Sir Rowland comes to meet her, he will take the initiative and propose to her. She says that the rules of polite society dictate that a woman should never take the first step in proposing to a man. So this is an indication of the decorum, the social manners that were in practice during the Restoration period. And she does long for a companion, but she does not want to show her desperation by breaking the rules and proposing to Sir Rowland herself. So she wants Sir Rowland to take the first move, take the first step. And then Lady Wishfort leaves to get dressed, and her daughter Mrs. Fainall enters, and then there is a conversation between Mrs. Fainall and Foible. But both of them, they are unaware that Mrs. Marwood is hiding in the closet and she can overhear their conversation. Mrs. Fainall has learnt that Mrs. Marwood has seen Foible talking to Mirabell in the park, and so she makes a remark on this. But Foible pretends as if nothing has happened because she does not know whether the plan that has been hatched by Mirabell and revealed to Foible, if that has been revealed to Mrs. Fainall or not, Foible does not know. Plus another thing is, Foible knows that once upon a time, Mirabell and Mrs. Fainall were lovers. So she does not want to hurt Mrs. Fainall. But Mrs. Fainall tells her that Mirabell had revealed the plans to her. She is aware of what is happening. And she says that she knows that the marriage between Foible and Waitwell had taken place that particular morning, and Waitwell is going to appear as Mirabell's uncle. He is going to take on the role of Sir Rowland, and he will be coming to meet Lady Wishfort and he will propose to Lady Wishfort. So as you can see, the play is full of intrigues and plots with characters going behind each other's backs and fooling them. That is what makes the plot very confusing. So Mrs. Fainall says that Mirabell's plan of Sir Rowland, Mirabel's purported uncle, coming and proposing to Lady Wishfort will actually make things easier. What will happen, according to Mrs. Fainall, is that Lady Wishfort would agree to the proposal of Sir Rowland and they would decide to get married. But by then, Lady Wishfort would be trapped in difficulties, and the only person who would be able to help her get out of this situation is Mirabel. But Mirabel will do so only if she promised to hand over Millamant's inheritance to Millamant, and if she agrees to the marriage between Mirabel and Millamant. Foible sympathizes with Mrs. Fainall's situation, and she had assumed that Mirabel would have kept all these plans in secret because he used to love Mrs. Fainall once upon a time. But now, Mrs. Fainall, who is married to the villain of the piece, Mr. Fainall, is helping Mirabel and her cousin Millamant get together. So Foible appreciates the large-heartedness of Mrs. Fainall and tells her that she had managed to convince Lady Wishfort to accept Sir Rowland's proposal when he came and proposed it to Lady Wishfort. Foible then tells Mrs. Fainall to inform Mirabel about the success of his plan. She says that Mrs. Marwood watches her very carefully. Foible says that she knows that Mrs. Marwood is attracted to Mirabel, but Mirabel can't abide her. Both of them leave the room unaware that Mrs. Marwood has eavesdropped on the conversation. Mrs. Marwood has heard everything and she comes out of the closet. She is very angry and she is in an extremely vengeful mood. At that point of time, a very hopeful and expectant Lady Wishfort comes and she apologizes to Mrs. Marwood for having forgotten about her. Mrs. Marwood does not reveal anything. She says that when she had been inside the closet, she had been amply entertained. Lady Wishfort seems to be very flustered and she says that there are a lot of things on her mind. She has a number of issues to attend to. She tells her that she is expecting her 40-year-old bachelor nephew, Sir Wilful, who lives in the country. Angry and vengeful, Marwood exclaims that it is high time Wilful got married. She also hatches another conspiracy. She tells Lady Wishfort that Wilful will make a good match for Millamant. And Lady Wishfort assures her that she herself had had such an idea. She promises her friend that she will propose it. Then she calls for her maid Foible. Foible comes in and Foible informs her that Mr. Whitwood and Mr. Petulant had come to dine with her. Lady Wishfort informs Mrs. Marwood that she is not dressed. So she requests Mrs. Marwood to entertain the visitors because she has to get dressed before meeting her guests. Lady Wishfort leaves the scene. Mrs. Marwood is on stage. And then Millamant and her maid Mincing, they enter. And Millamant looks very vexed. She looks irritated. She has a broken fan in her hand. Now during the Restoration period, both men and women, they used to have heavily powdered faces and they used to wear wigs, and the wigs were also powdered. So they never revealed their actual hair, and there used to be a lot of ruffles and lace on their shoes, on their clothes. Even men used to have a lot of laces and ruffles on their clothes, on their shoes, on their shirts, everywhere. And now Millamant, she comes inside the room and she says that her fan is broken, and she appears to be very, very irritated, and she says that she had got caught in the argument between Petulant and Wetwood, and Petulant had provoked her, and Millamant rules that one cannot choose one's acquaintances as one chooses their clothes. The already irritated and vexed Millamant is further angered when Mrs. Marwood begins berating her. Mrs. Marwood accuses her of having hidden her affair with Mirabel. Millamant sharply reacts. She says that Mirabel's love for her is not a secret. It is openly known. Everybody knows that Mirabel loves her. Mrs. Marwood and Millamant, they get into an argument with each other. Marwood says that she hates Mirabel, and Millamant says that she also hates Mirabel, but he continues to love her. Meanwhile, Petulant and Whitwood, they arrive, and they are soon joined by Sir Wilful, Whitwood's elder brother, and Millamant's proposed suitor. Both brothers, they act as if they do not recognize each other. Fainall also arrives, and when all other characters leave the stage, there is a secret conversation between Fainall and Mrs. Marwood. Mrs. Marwood reveals Mirabel's plan to Fainall, and he is very angry that he is being cuckolded by his wife. His wife is cheating on him, and she is helping his enemy Mirabel. Mrs. Marwood tells Fainall to inform Lady Wishfort about Mrs. Fainall's betrayal. Fainall tells Mrs. Marwood that he doesn't care about his wife, and he also tells her that he has managed to acquire control over most of her inheritance. He tells her that he will share some of the money that belongs to Mrs. Fainall with Mrs. Marwood. Mrs. Marwood tells him that she is planning to send a letter to Lady Wishfort while the meeting between Lady Wishfort and Sir Rowland is going on, and the letter will inform Lady Wishfort that Sir Rowland is an impostor, that he is acting as someone else. And the letter will not come from Mrs. Marwood, but she will make sure that it is delivered by someone else. The letter will reveal that Sir Rowland is actually false, that he is fake, and Mrs. Marwood is wary of Foible because Foible knows the secrets that lie between Mr. Fainall and Mrs. Marwood. The scene ends with Marwood convincing Fainall that she doesn't care for Mirabel. So Fainall kisses Marwood and they resolve their differences. That is how this scene ends. Act 3 ends.